alive! Alive!
Ah, the great outdoors. Taking a late night road trip, or maybe you prefer sleeping out under the stars. What could possibly go wrong? Allow Mortis Media and I to give you a few examples. So set your GPS and grab your map and compass so you don't get lost. Enjoy. Me and a buddy chose some national forest in Oregon specifically for how remote it was. About a year prior, a family became lost and the father was never found, although mother and child lived to tell the tale. Anyway, we set up camp around 4 p.m. after getting pretty deep into the woods, on a mountain accessed by logging roads, maybe about 100 to 200 yards from where we parked near a lake. Without much else to do, we started a fire and cracked some beers as the sun went down. That's when pickup trucks started going through the woods, slowing down when they saw our campfire. We got curious and stupid via the beers and went deeper into the woods. Seemed like a hell of a party was going on. Then we stumbled into a clearing where maybe 15 to 20 dudes were hanging around a bonfire next to a mossy, rundown camper trailer. One had a pistol on his hip. Another was just chilling with a shotgun. We're like, oh shit at first, but someone approaches us and acts neighborly and invites us to have a beer, so it seemed okay. They were joking around mostly. Some talking about drugs, coke, meth. But there were some older dudes that seemed pretty tense. As this was all happening, 4 to 5 dudes who seemed to be standing at the camper, which didn't look like it had been moved in a long time. The guys went inside for a few minutes. When they came back out, they said we were faggots and saw us making out. Pretty quickly, I got up to head back to our site, but my slower, drunker buddy took a few punches. Then he made it out and started following. We were sprinting through the forest and the darkness, just hoping to get back to our site by spotting the glowing embers of our burnt-out fire. The whole time, with gun-toters right behind us. We found our site, and with pretty much everything in the tent, we pulled up the stakes to toss it in the trunk of our car, when we hear an enraged scream only about 50 yards away from us. "Kill the faggots!" So we were like, fuck it, dropped the tent and gear without even saying a word to each other, and sprinted in the direction of the car.
This is a story that my uncle told me. A number of years ago, he lived in a very large old house in the middle of nowhere in central Illinois, about 30 miles from any real town or city. He didn't think much of it when he heard a car turn off and someone knock at the door. He figured that his roommate had locked himself out and thought it would be funny to let him figure it out by himself. Only his roommate was still inside. The knocking got more desperate until my uncle fell asleep. For those wondering how, he was both a boozer, snored loudly, and was on sleep medication at the time. When drunk, the man could have slept through a nuclear explosion. His buddy found the car outside next morning with the doors open. My uncle came outside as the police were questioning his buddy. They tried to find the owner, and they did. 6 months later, decomposed in a field, evidently murdered. The murderer still has not been found. He is still rather bothered by whether he could have saved his life.
I was camping with 2 college friends, way the hell out in the mountains, of Trinity County in far northern California. It wasn't an established campsite, just a nice spot many miles down a dirt road off the main highway, Route 299, which is largely isolated to begin with. There might not have been another soul for miles. This is a very rural and rugged area, and it's part of a region where a lot of weed is cultivated illegally, which can sometimes make it dangerous. We got to this spot late in the day, a nice little clearing along a stream, and set up camp. As we sat around the fire after dark, shooting the shit like usual, a large animal suddenly exploded out of the brush and seemed to stop right outside our fire circle. But then we didn't hear it leave. Not even a twig cracking. It was just gone. It seemed unusual to all of us that the animal would arrive so loudly. We listened to it approach for several oh shit seconds, but then make no discernible noise retreating. One of my friends, who was somewhat of a local, said he thought it was a puma for that reason. A tad unnerving, but okay. So we laugh it off, drink beer, and eventually crashed out, with one friend and I in a 2-person tent and the other in a tiny single-person tent next to us. We fell fast asleep for at least a few hours. Out of nowhere in the middle of the night, I woke the fuck up. There were footsteps right outside the tents. And I don't know why, but I felt a very strong intuition not to call out to my friend in the other tent, to check if it was him. And then, the person walking called out, and I almost shit myself. It wasn't my friend. It was just some random guy, circling our tent for the next 5 minutes, calling, "Hello, hello." He said it over and over, in a disconcertingly calm and measured voice. Remember, this was the middle of the night, in the middle of fucking nowhere. And I had this crazy gut feeling to stay absolutely silent and wait for attack, which I did, knife in hand. My friend in my tent slept through the whole thing, and the weird guy left with no sound of a vehicle or anything. And at some point, dawn arrived. The next day, the first thing I did was ask my friend in the other tent whether he heard the dude walking around last night. And he did. He had the same instinct as I had. My other friend, who had been sleeping next to me, was completely confused. It was super creepy, and the way the guy was just moving around and speaking had a really weird vibe. My friend wasn't the type to get scared, or the type you'd expect not to confront someone in that situation. So we all just let it be, and basked, for a few minutes, in the what the fuckness of the event. One of the little mysteries of my life that I always look back on is what that guy wanted, and what would have happened if we'd responded or burst out of our tents.
I was out backpacking alone one night in the woods, pretty far from any civilization, and as far as I knew, miles away from any other person. I had picked a nice spot to pitch my tent, and had settled in to sleep for the night. I had just closed my eyes, when out of nowhere, I hear this blood-curdling cry. It was without a doubt the most terrifying noise I've ever heard. It sounded like that of a woman screaming, but in a twisted, inhuman way. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped my tent slightly, and looked around, but I didn't see anything. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, heart pounding, and waited for something to happen. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I heard it a few more times, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, and then suddenly it stopped. I was so absolutely certain that I had just heard someone being murdered. I ended up staying the night there anyway, because I was too afraid to move or to try and hike back down to the trail in the dark. But I don't think I managed to ever get any sleep. It wasn't until I got back, after booking it out of there after sunrise, and I was telling the story to a friend of mine, that he asked me if it had been an elk. I'd never known what an elk sounded like before, but I looked it up, and sure enough, that's exactly what I heard. So, a happy ending at least. This is what an elk sounds like. Scary shit if you've never heard it before.
I'm from an Iroquois reservation in Ontario, Canada. It's almost like you can ask anyone from around here if they've experienced any kind of paranormal stuff, and they'll usually have a story to tell. My culture and heritage is filled with stories of otherworldly beings and creatures, and stories of how things came to be before Europeans inhabited the territory. I'm naturally skeptical about a lot of what people say they see in the bush here, as I've hunted the territory my entire life. I've come across a lot of things in the bush one might consider paranormal. Odd animal cries that make you rethink your footsteps, and some things that chill you to the bone and make you question your life choices. This particular time, I wasn't hunting. My family homestead is situated almost a half a kilometer into the bush. It was early summer, just as the fireflies were coming out. A belief of the Iroquois is that fireflies are a sign that Indian medicine is at its most powerful, both good and bad. So I was getting home from work a little after midnight. I turn off the car and get out to start walking up the path to the house. Normal routine. This night, though, I stopped to look at the fireflies up on the hill behind my home. It looked amazing. My porch wraps around the entire house, and I walked to the back of the house and started walking slowly up the hill. All of a sudden, I hear some beating, like music, and I looked back to see if my car radio was still on. From a distance, I was assured my car was off. No sound was coming from that direction. So I walked to the top of the hill. That's when the sound got louder. I started to hear it clearly. From the top of the hill, looking down onto the other side into the bushline, I no longer see any fireflies. All I hear is the faint sound of a water drum beating and a low, raspy voice singing an old Indian song. I turned around, went inside, and tried to convince myself I wasn't crazy. It was the only spiritual experience I've ever had in my life. And I go back out to that spot every summer and lay down tobacco and cedar for my visitor. Hey guys, DuchessDark here, and thank you so much for listening. Mortis Media and I invaded each other's channels again, so if you'd like to listen to part 2, it's over on Mortis Media's channel, setting up camp, so to speak. Won't you join us? Click the link on the screen now or in the description box to follow us over. Don't keep him waiting.